Good morning, my fellow Canadians. Well, I haven't done a post in a while. Facebook saw fit to kill my old account under the guise of suspicious activity. I followed their guidelines for proving that I am who I say I am, and of course, I heard nothing. So I opened another account. I was watching the Dan Bongino show. I like what he has to say. I like the way he presents his material. He admits some, like me, some of it is opinion, but it's opinion based on evidence and interpretation of evidence. It is now pretty much a given, anybody who's followed the latest news developments, that the Wuhan virus escaped from a lab. Now, I want you to pay particular note to the word escaped from a lab in China. This was not a naturally occurring or naturally evolving virus. This was an engineered gain of function. Would you call it a bioweapon? It was a gain of function. It was an engineered virus. It was worked on. It was enhanced through man and scientific intervention. That's pretty much a given. I mean, there's still people who deny it, who still follow the old line, but there's so much evidence now that this was a lab leak, they claim. Now, I'm going to digress for a quick second here because I want to give a little context to where I want to go with this. Anybody who studied military terminology, military tactics, understands one of the first primary military dictums is know your enemy. Know your enemy. Know how they think. Know how they act. Know their tactics. Know their mindset, right? In my association, I did the basic intelligence operator course years ago when I was in the military. And it was an eye-opener. And then with the years of my own personal study about military tactics, history, historic battles, etc., etc., I shan't prattle on. But one of the things that comes to mind is the big difference, again, know your enemy, the big difference between the mindset of the Western philosophies versus, let's say, the Oriental or even Eastern European philosophies. We are raised with an ingrained sanctity of human life ethos, right? Every individual life is precious. Every individual matters. We have this hammered into us religiously, societally, that the individual has value. Historically, the American troops and the British were horrified at the way the Japanese soldiers just threw themselves into battle, heedless of casualties. The Germans were horrified, the Nazi armies, how the Russians just kept coming, these huge waves. No matter what you hit them with, they just kept coming. To the point that they ran out of ammunition. Their machine gun barrels would overheat. They would fall back, and they couldn't, and they still just kept coming. No matter how many they killed, they still kept coming. Their commanders just threw them heedlessly into battle. The idea of a suicide bomber, of someone killing themselves, the kamikaze attacks, this was totally alien to the mindset of the Allied forces, that you just throw your life away like that. Now, in the case of the Japanese, they could not afford a war of attrition. They didn't have enough people to afford a war of attrition, but the Russians, they did. Historically, they've never cared about the individual life. It was the objective. And how many people died taking it? Too bad. A friend of mine who follows history says that as more and more evidence becomes clear, as more and more of these old Soviet Union archives are open to military researchers, the death toll to the Soviet Union during the Second World War has been steadily rising. Now, I believe it's now over 30 million dead. 30 million dead. Now, that's not all military. That's soldiers, civilians, collateral damage, but 30 million dead. Like, to the Western mind, this is almost inconceivable. I mean, that's almost the entire population of Canada currently, right? 30 million dead. But it's attributed to Stalin. Whoever penned this is really immaterial. What it boils down to is one death is a tragedy and a million deaths are a statistic. And it's attributed to Stalin. Was it Stalin? I don't know. But it is indicative of the Western mindset that yes, one death is, but you try to wrap your head around a million dead. So when you read about the Chinese Revolution, the Great Cultural Revolution under Mao, now I've heard figures as high as 100 million, 100 million Chinese citizens murdered under Mao. 100 million. Was it that many? Does it make any difference whether it's 10 million, 50 million, 100 million? The point I'm trying to make here is the idea of the sanctity of life. That's alien to these people in terms of the thought processes. The goal is everything. And if X number of people die to achieve this goal, too bad. Okay? Now, with all that preamble out of the way, in all the rhetoric I've seen, and both the apologists for China and the detractors, the condemners of China for the Wuhan virus, which has so effectively damaged the world and our Canadian economy, the US economy, the damage has been done to death toll, which is considerable, but not as high as some of the other illnesses if you take a look apparently at the numbers. But everybody's saying escaped from a lab, escaped from a lab, escaped from a lab in Wuhan. I haven't heard, now I'm not saying I'm the first one to do this, but I have not heard one commentary, one commentator, one analyst address the idea this was not accidental release. Think about this. Given the mindset that I put in the preamble, is it inconceivable that the Chinese Communist government, the PRC, would say, okay, we have this enhanced virus, literally a bioweapon. Let's release this on the world and see what it will do. Let's test the mettle of the West and see how they react. Let's probe for their weak points. Let's see how much control we can gain over the West, over their economy, over their people. How will they react? Will they react from a position of strength, logic? Will it be panic? What will happen if we do this? And someone says, well, we're going to kill 50 million Chinese. Back to what I said earlier about sanctity of life. And the government saying, so what? We can afford it. Look at our population. 50 million Chinese. 50 million of our own citizens dead. We'll replace that in a generation, if not less. But what will it do to the West? What will it do to Europe? What will the effects be if we do this? As a deliberate experiment of probing for the weaknesses and strengths of the Western democracies, has anybody mentioned that possibility? Bears thinking about, doesn't it? If you understand the mindset, like I said, of the communist people, the communist governments, the contempt for the individual human life in pursuit of a goal. If you understand it and grasp those concepts and understand that these are not ideas or presuppositions on my part, these are proven facts. So, all I'm saying, I would like to see this idea floated, perhaps by people more educated or more clutched in than I. I would like to see this explored further. Because it is, to me, with what I've laid out, to me it is entirely conceivable that the PRC would deliberately put this out there just to see what would happen and how this pandemic could be exploited for their gain. So, something to think about. Good morning, my fellow Canadians.